On the day I was diagnosed with stomach cancer, my son was calling another woman Mom. He said, "You're old and ugly. You can't compare to Aunt Jessica, who is gentle and beautiful. No wonder Dad likes her instead of you. I want her to be my mom." So I got divorced and let him have his wish. But later, he regretted it and came to me crying. By then, however, I was already dead. 01 When Blake sent me a WeChat message, I had just left the hospital. The diagnosis report in my hand still had the stains of my unwiped tears when I received the video he sent. In the video, it was a parents' meeting at school. My 10-year-old son, Asher, was standing in the classroom, pointing at the young and beautiful woman beside him and speaking with great pride, "This is my mom." I knew the woman he was pointing at. 3 months ago, I caught her and my husband, Blake, in a hotel. But now, my own son was calling her Mom. In the video, the classmates were all envious. "Wow, Asher, your mom is so young and beautiful." "Exactly. She looks like a star." Seemingly pleased by these compliments, Asher smiled even more happily and nestled into the woman's arms. When the video ended, Blake sent another message, "See? This family doesn't need you." The midday sun was so bright that it hurt my eyes. Suddenly, I remembered that more than a month ago, Asher forgot to take his medicine when he went to his interest class. I rushed to take the medicine to him, but he stopped me at the classroom door. In the empty corridor, he looked at me nervously. "Mom, why did you come dressed like this? Other moms are all young and beautiful, but you're so sloppy. Could you please not embarrass me?" I looked at my reflection in the window. I was still wearing my home clothes that I forgot to change because I was in a hurry to deliver the medicine, and my face was sallow due to years of working hard for my job and family. It was quite embarrassing indeed. But I didn't expect that my own son would think like that too. 02 When I gave birth to Asher back then, I went through a lot of hardships. I was hospitalized for several months because of a low-lying placenta, and there was massive bleeding during the delivery. It's no exaggeration to say that I almost sacrificed half of my life for this child. Not to mention that after Asher was born, he was found to have an allergic constitution. So every day, besides working hard to provide for his material needs, I also had to worry about his health all the time. 10 years passed, and before I knew it, I, who was once voted as the campus belle, had become a haggard woman. And now, I didn't even have my health anymore. But what was the result? I looked down at the WeChat moments on my phone and saw that both Asher and Blake, father and son, had coincidentally posted the same photo. It was a photo with that woman. That woman was truly beautiful. She was young, gentle, and there wasn't a trace on her of being ravaged by time or childbirth. The three of them stood together, looking so harmonious, as if they were really a family. On further thought, it seemed that neither Asher nor Blake had ever posted a photo with me. I suddenly wanted to ask myself, "Miriam, was it worth it?" 03 When I got home, Blake and the others hadn't come back yet. I started to pack my own things. I originally thought that since it was the home where I had lived for over 10 years, it would be very troublesome to move out. But unexpectedly, in the end, I only packed a small suitcase. I suddenly realized that I couldn't even remember when was the last time I bought clothes or cosmetics for myself. The consumption records on my shopping cart and credit card were all for the things I bought for Asher. I moved to the small apartment that my parents had bought for me before I got married. After settling down, I submitted my resignation letter to the company. My colleagues and the boss were all shocked by my departure and wanted to persuade me to stay, but I just shook my head and said, "I'm tired and want to take a break." Probably thinking of how hard I had been working usually, they didn't say anything more. After packing up my things and coming out of the company, I suddenly received a call from Blake. He shouted on the phone, "Asher is having a food allergy. Where are you?" By the time I rushed to the hospital, Asher had already stabilized. At the door of the ward, Blake pointed at my nose and scolded me angrily, "Miriam, where on earth did you go? Don't you know that our son ate something he's allergic to? Is this how a mother should act?" I found it ridiculous when I heard that. "Didn't you say that this family didn't need me?" Blake froze for a moment when I said that, but then said resentfully, "But you're still Asher's mom." Mom. Just these two simple words, yet they seemed like shackles. When a child has an allergy, others will say, "How could you, as a mother, be so careless?" When a child falls down, others will say, "How could you, as a mother, be so negligent?" When a child doesn't do well in school, others will also say, "How could you, as a mother, be so irresponsible?" But no one remembers the father. It's as if women were born to bear all of this. Suddenly, I remembered what the doctor had said to me in the hospital before, "Miss Miriam, you're already in the advanced stage of stomach cancer. Even if you receive treatment, you probably only have a few months left." Only a few months left to live? Then in these last few months, I wanted to live as Miriam. Not as Blake's wife. Nor as Asher's mother. Thinking of this, I raised my head to look at Blake and said calmly, "Blake, let's get divorced." When Blake and I came out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, I saw Blake's young girlfriend named Jessica playing with Asher. Asher was hugging a KFC family bucket, his mouth full of oil. Happily he said to Jessica, "Aunt Jessica, you're so nice. Mom always wouldn't let me eat KFC, saying something about hormones. It's so annoying." The words that I was about to say to stop him from eating fried chicken suddenly got stuck in my throat. I lowered my head and curled my lips self-mockingly. What else was there to say? Was I not disliked enough already? The days after the divorce were much happier than I had imagined. Although being sick was painful, for the first time in over 10 years, I could do the things I liked. I could sleep until I woke up naturally. I could have afternoon tea with my friends. I could sit on the balcony and be lost in thought for an afternoon. I also found a dance studio. I actually liked dancing very much. When I was a child, I had even thought that I would become a dancer when I grew up. And I did have the talent for it. It's just that later, I hurt my waist during pregnancy and that dream was shattered. And now, I wanted to give it another try. Not to become a professional dancer, but just to do the things I liked. The young girls in the dance studio were all very lovely. Due to my health condition, I couldn't dance much every day, but I could help them with planning and backstage work. They all liked me very much too. They accompanied me to buy beautiful and fashionable clothes and taught me how to apply the current popular makeup. They also opened a Douyin account for me and posted videos of us dancing together. I hadn't been so happy for a long time. But this happiness lasted for less than a month before it was interrupted by a phone call from Asher's school. The teacher told me that Asher was leading others to bully a classmate. And that student, because of being bullied, suffered from depression and cut his wrists to commit suicide. Fortunately, the parents found out in time and saved him. I rushed to the school in a hurry and repeatedly bent down to apologize to the parents of the other student. But they couldn't forgive us. "Do you know that your son pushed our child's head into the toilet? And even stripped off his clothes to take pictures? How could he be so vicious at such a young age? How on earth did you educate your child?" I bent over and couldn't say a word. In fact, I had been educating my child with great care. I was really good to Asher, but I never spoiled him. From childhood to adulthood, whenever he did something wrong, I would definitely criticize and educate him severely. Instead, every time, Blake would stop me. "Isn't it normal for a child to make some mistakes? Why are you making such a big deal out of it?" Perhaps it was because Blake was always trying to gloss things over in the middle, or perhaps it was because I really didn't do a good enough job. After all these years, Asher still hadn't been taught well. When he was a child, he would bully other children. Now he even bullied his classmates. His selfishness seemed to be in his bones. No matter how much he was educated, it just made him better at pretending, but couldn't change his nature. Sometimes I couldn't help thinking whether some things were really innate. In his bones, he has the same blood as Blake. Just as selfish. Just as heartless. It's like now. That child was already lying in the hospital, and his parents were crying so hard that they could hardly straighten their backs. But Asher still didn't realize that he was wrong. He just stiffened his neck and shouted at me, "Why are you apologizing to them? That Pen Asher is as fat as a pig, all greasy, and yet he has the same name as me. I feel sick just looking at him. What's wrong with bullying him? And you, Miriam? Why are you bowing and scraping to apologize to others like this? Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" I finally couldn't bear it anymore and raised my hand to give him a hard slap. Asher staggered from the slap, covered his face, and looked at me in shock. You hit me?" Blake and Jessica, who arrived late, walked into the office and saw this scene. Blake flew into a rage, pulled Asher behind him and roared at me, "Miriam, what are you doing? How could you hit my son?" Jessica also pretended to persuade me hypocritically, "Yes, Sister Miriam. Children are ignorant. You can talk things over nicely." After saying that, she also went to persuade Asher, "Asher, you should know that your mother is doing this for your own good. Don't be angry with your mother." Her words, on the contrary, completely enraged Asher. "What mother?" He broke free from Blake's hand, cried and shouted at me, "This ugly woman. It's okay that she's old and ugly, but she's been controlling me since I was a kid. She wouldn't let me eat this or that. And she criticizes me all day long. With a woman as annoying as you, it's no wonder Dad likes Aunt Jessica instead of you. I hate you too. I don't want you to be my mother. I want Aunt Jessica to be my mother." Asher's voice echoed continuously in the office. I stared at him blankly, and my heart ached as if it were being squeezed. I did forbid Asher from eating a lot of things when he was a child. But that was because he was prone to allergies. I did discipline him since he was a child too. But it was always because he had really made big mistakes. For example, when he was 5 years old, he pushed another child into the river. When he was 8 years old, he stole money from home. And this time was another example. But in his eyes, everything I had done was unforgivable. 10 months of pregnancy and 10 years of raising him. It was not as good as the hypocritical sweet words of Aunt Jessica. The air in the office was too quiet. Finally, the mother of the bullied child couldn't bear it anymore and said softly, "Asher's mother." Only then did I raise my head. 08 I didn't cry. I just looked at Blake and Jessica beside me and said calmly, "Blake, Jessica, there are some things that I just want to say once and you should remember them clearly. Asher has a congenital allergic constitution. He's allergic to seafood, eggs, nuts, pollen, and dust. He can't eat these things and his room should be kept clean or he'll have allergic reactions. In case of an allergic attack, there are allergy medicines in his room, school bag, and the small bag he carries with him. You should give them to him in time. Besides, he gets tonsillitis every winter. You should pay attention to keeping him warm. His Chinese grades are not good, but his math is okay. Now that he's about to enter junior high school soon, I found a tutor for him. You should remember to send him there regularly." I suddenly stopped talking. I didn't even realize that once I started talking about Asher's affairs I could talk so endlessly. But Asher just looked at me with disgust and impatience. "Old woman, why are you talking about these things?" I looked at him calmly without the slightest bit of anger. "I'm saying these because I don't want to care about these things anymore in the future. Didn't you say that you don't want me as your mother and you want Jessica to be your mother? Okay, I'll do as you wish." My voice trembled slightly but every word was firm. "Asher, from today on, I, Miriam, will just pretend that I never gave birth to you as my son. If when I divorced Blake before I just gave up the identity of Blake's wife. Then at this moment I really let go of the identity. I deleted all the apps and notes on my phone that recorded Asher's allergies. When I finished all of this I really felt completely free. If when I divorced Blake before I just gave up the identity of Blake's wife. Then at this moment I really let go of the identity of Asher's mother. I went back to the dance studio. The girls there told me that they were going to have a tour. They asked me if I would like to accompany them as their manager. I readily agreed. Although it was called a tour, in fact we arranged the schedule very loosely and we could also travel at the same time. Only then did I remember that when I was in college before I actually loved traveling very much. At that time I told Blake that we would travel to every corner of the world together, but after having a child I never went on a proper trip again. Even when I traveled it was all centered around Asher. Where to go could educate him better. Where to go was less likely to trigger his allergies. Where could he be happier? And now I finally didn't have to consider other people's feelings and could enjoy my real trip. The tour lasted for a long time, about 3 or 4 months. Along the way I enjoyed the freedom and the beautiful scenery, but at the same time news about Asher and Blake also reached my ears. After all, we had lived in the same circle for so many years. Even if I didn't want to take the initiative to ask about them, there would always be various people telling me. They said that not long after I left Asher had several allergic reactions and was sent to the hospital. I wasn't too worried. I knew that the nanny at home had been with Asher for many years and medical care is quite advanced now. Although Asher had allergies there was no life-threatening danger. He just had to suffer a bit more. And in the second month after I left, Asher bullied his classmates again. This time the matter became a big deal. The parents of the other party called the police and Asher was also suspected of violent assault and was finally expelled from school. Blake was furious about this and gave Asher a severe beating. In the third month after I left, someone told me that Jessica and Blake were going to get married. The reason was that Jessica was pregnant. This news surprised me a bit. After all, when Blake and I wanted to have a child before, we tried for a long time but didn't succeed. Finally we went to the hospital for an examination and found out that it was Blake's problem. That's why we had to do in vitro fertilization. I had one injection after another in my belly before I finally got pregnant with Asher. But I didn't expect that now that Blake was older he could have a child so easily. I thought that I really had no fate with him. After Jessica and Blake had their own child, Asher's identity obviously became awkward. An acquaintance told me that he saw Jessica scolding Asher loudly in the mall, completely losing her previous hypocritical and kind appearance. When my friend told me these things he seemed to think that I would ask for details. But after being silent for a long time, I just sent a ticket for the tour. My dance troupe will have a performance next week. Would you like to come and watch it? My friend accepted the e-ticket. But he didn't come. Instead, Asher came. When Asher came to the backstage to look for me, the girls in my dance troupe had just finished their performance. I was so happy that I was clapping. But perhaps because I was too excited, I suddenly felt dizzy. Fortunately, a dance teacher beside me supported me. "Sister Miriam, are you okay?" Before I could answer, I heard that familiar angry voice, "What are you doing?" I raised my head and saw that it was Asher. I glanced at the dance teacher beside me. He was a male teacher, young and handsome. And because he was a bit hasty when he supported me just now, at first glance, our posture seemed a bit ambiguous. Asher obviously misunderstood. He pointed at my nose and said angrily, "I was wondering why you didn't care about me. So it turns out that you're here flirting with a younger man. How disgusting. Have you no shame?" I looked at Asher. Even with just one glance, I could immediately tell that he had lost weight and looked haggard. But did he notice that I had lost weight? Because of the torture of cancer, I had lost over 10 pounds in weight and a lot of my hair had fallen out during this period. But Asher didn't seem to notice anything, he only noticed my relationship with other men. And he used this to explain my indifference to him self-righteously. I lowered my head and smiled silently. During these days, in the dead of night, I wasn't without worry about Asher. I also secretly checked his and Blake's WeChat moments. I even checked Jessica's WeChat moments. I just wanted to know if Asher was doing well. But now, I just felt that all my worries seemed like a joke. I didn't mean to explain and just said faintly, "What are you coming to me for?" Asher choked for a moment, but then he shouted loudly, "Of course I'm coming to ask you for money. You're my mother. It's your duty to support me." I just found it ridiculous when I heard that. But while laughing, my eyes couldn't help feeling sour and swollen. I knew it. How could Asher come to find me because he really missed me? It was just that since Jessica had a child, Blake wasn't as generous to him anymore, so he thought of me. I looked away and said faintly, "You're still a minor now. Even if I were to give you child support, I should give it to your father." You. Asher wanted to say something, but I interrupted him again. "All right. I won't give you less of what should be given to you, but I won't give you anything extra." Asher looked at me with complete anger in his eyes. "You're all the same." He clenched his fists tightly and roared, "You all have someone else outside and don't care about me anymore. I hate you all." With that, he turned around and ran away. And the moment he left, I finally couldn't hold on anymore and everything went black in front of my eyes. Sister Miriam. 11. When I opened my eyes again, I was already in the hospital. Every part of my body hurt as if it was going to split open. The girls in the dance troupe were all standing in front of me, with red eyes. "Sister Miriam, why didn't you tell us about your health condition?" Seeing their expressions, I knew it in my heart and asked, "How long do I have left?" The girls cried even more sadly. "The doctor said it's just a matter of these few days." I breathed a sigh of relief and actually felt a sense of relief. "Then I'm sorry to trouble you." I smiled gently. "Please stay with me in these last few days." These innocent and kind-hearted girls accompanied me through the last few days of my life. If it were in the past, I would never have thought that it would be these almost strangers who would accompany me to the end of my life. I finally passed away. Since my parents had passed away long ago and I didn't have many relatives, I entrusted my funeral arrangements to these girls. They held a dreamy and beautiful funeral for me. At the funeral, Blake came with Asher. 12. At the funeral, Blake was extremely impatient and kept making phone calls. "I brought Asher here. After all, she was his mother. Why are you jealous of a dead person?" "What? You said you have a stomachache?" All right, I'll go back right away." Needless to say, the person Blake was sending voice messages to was his beloved pregnant wife, Jessica. Now that Jessica was pregnant with his child, he naturally cherished her very much. In the end, unable to argue with Jessica, he had to compromise. After hanging up the phone, he looked at Asher impatiently. "Asher, go and pay your respects to your mother quickly and then we'll leave." However, Asher didn't answer him. He just stared blankly at my black and white photo. After a long while, he suddenly said, "Do you know? I didn't have breakfast when I went out today." Blake was impatient all over his face. "Who cares if you had breakfast or not? In the past when Mom was at home she would never forget to remind me to have breakfast." Before Blake could finish his words, Asher interrupted him again. "I used to find it annoying, but now I realize that she was the only person in the world who truly cared about me." Blake's expression froze, and there was a look of disapproval in his eyes. But probably out of respect for the dead, he still reluctantly put on a false show of affection and said, "Of course. Your mother definitely loved you." However, Asher suddenly raised his head and looked at him with intense hatred in his eyes. "But it was you. You drove Mom away. All for that shameless woman Jessica." Only then did Blake's face turn ugly. "What do you mean I drove her away? Don't talk nonsense. Also, how can you talk about your Aunt Jessica like that?" But Asher's eyes were already red at this time, and he pounced on Blake like a madman and pushed him down. "It was you. You killed my mother. Give Mom back to me." Blake gasped in pain from the beating. He was also furious. "Asher, are you crazy?" He pushed Asher away and cursed loudly. "Don't you know in your heart who really drove your mother away? It's you. Your mother didn't care at all about who I was with outside. What really hurt her was your attitude as a son." Asher's face turned completely pale. "No. You're lying." But Blake had completely lost patience with his son at this time and said coldly and ruthlessly, "You clearly know it in your heart. Your mother was so good to you, but what about you? You were the one who said you wanted Aunt Jessica instead of her and even disliked her for being old and ugly. Huh? But I'll tell you, your mother was actually even more beautiful than your Aunt Jessica is now. It was all because of giving birth to you and having to take care of you, a son who was allergic all the time, that she gradually became haggard. Your mother was exhausted and driven to death by you. How dare you pretend to be a filial son here? As a spirit, I didn't go to reincarnation immediately but lingered in the human world. So I witnessed with my own eyes the scene where Blake and Asher were hurling insults at each other. I just found it extremely ridiculous. These two men who used to be the most important to me, these two men who had hurt me the most deeply. They ignored me when I was alive. But now that I'm dead, both of them were scolding each other because of me. After all, Asher was just a child and couldn't out-argue Blake. In the end, he was scolded until his face was covered with tears. Blake just sneered and turned around to leave the funeral. Only Asher was left looking at my black and white photo, choking with sobs and saying, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry." I looked at Asher with tears all over his face, but my heart was calm. Because I knew very clearly. His sadness was more about losing someone who truly cared about him. If Blake hadn't ignored him and if Jessica hadn't shown her true colors, would he be sad about my death? Or perhaps would he just be happy that there was one less person to discipline him? I think I was truly desperate about this child whom I had once loved with all my life. I wouldn't be sad for his tears. Instead, I would even speculate about him with the worst intentions. When Asher was in tears, my lawyer appeared. "Are you Asher?" The lawyer pushed his glasses and said faintly, "Regarding your mother's will, I'd like to discuss it with you." Asher suddenly raised his head. At this moment, I saw a glint in his eyes. But unexpectedly, in the next second, he heard the lawyer continue. "According to your mother's wishes, all of her estate will be put into insurance. Before you come of age, 3,000 yuan will be provided for your living expenses every month. In addition, medical expenses and tuition fees can also be paid from the insurance. And after you come of age, all of her money will be donated to charity organizations." That's right. This was my final decision. As I once told Asher, I would give him what should be given to him. But I wouldn't give him anything extra. Since I gave birth to him, I would provide for his basic living expenses. But for anything more than that, I wouldn't give it to him. Asher was dumbfounded when he heard the lawyer's words. It took him a long time to come to his senses, and then he was so angry that he shouted furiously, "Why? She's my mother. All her money should be mine after she died. Why donate it to others?" I looked at Asher's angry look and curled my lips mockingly. I knew it. Asher's sadness about my death was cheap. He was more sad about losing a provider. Asher was shouting angrily, but no matter how much he shouted, it couldn't be changed. My spirit lingered in the human world for a few more months. I didn't expect that in just these few months, many more things happened. Firstly, as Jessica's belly grew bigger and bigger, Blake paid less and less attention to Asher. He casually sent him to a boarding school, clearly intending to completely ignore him. But with Asher's allergic constitution, it definitely wouldn't work for him to stay in a boarding school. He got sick several times. Fortunately, the school was quite responsible and medical care was advanced nowadays, so he didn't have any major problems. But he had changed a lot. His once arrogant and domineering personality became silent and gloomy because of the repeated illnesses. Come to think of it, it was understandable. Going to the hospital every few days, who could still be arrogant? He also became colder and colder towards Blake, his father. He didn't even want to go home on weekends. And as for Blake, he was wholeheartedly focused on his new child and was quite happy that Asher didn't come to bother him. But soon, he regretted it. Because he found out that the child in Jessica's belly wasn't his at all. 14 The discovery of this matter was completely an accident. That day, Blake was supposed to be on a business trip, but he was worried about Jessica, who was pregnant, being alone, so he turned back halfway home. Unexpectedly, he saw a shocking scene. He had thought that Jessica, his beloved young wife who only had eyes for him, was actually rolling in bed with another man even though she was pregnant. Blake was devastated. He also couldn't help but start to doubt whose child it was. After an examination, he indeed found out that the child belonged to that man, not him. He was so angry that he almost wanted to beat Jessica to death. He pointed at Jessica's nose angrily and cursed loudly, "Why did you lie to me?" And Jessica also knew that she was cornered, so she just let things slide and sneered at Blake. "Do you think I didn't want to have a child with you? Of course I did. Having a child for you, a fool, and cheating you out of all your money so that I could have no worries in the future. But you should also look at yourself. Can you even have a child?" Blake's face changed. "What do you mean?" Jessica continued to sneer. "I already had someone examine you a long time ago. You can't have a child at all. It must have been really difficult for you and your wife to have a child back then. You should have known that you had a problem long ago." As a spirit, I finally understood when I heard this conversation beside them. No wonder it took so much effort for me and Blake to have Asher back then. It turned out that it was Blake's problem. I was still wondering at that time how Blake and this Jessica could get pregnant so quickly. I thought that I just didn't have a good relationship with Blake, but now it seems that Jessica just took a shortcut. And Blake on this side was completely devastated when he heard this news. "You lied to me." Jessica didn't lie to him. After Blake went to have an examination by himself, he also quickly realized this truth. The child in Jessica's belly wasn't his. Moreover, Asher was the only child he would ever have in his life. Only then did Blake feel extremely regretful. He had actually neglected his only child like this for the sake of the imposter in Jessica's belly. He hurriedly went to the boarding school to find Asher, wanting to repair their already precarious father-son relationship. But obviously, it was already too late. 15 after what had happened before, Asher had completely seen through his father. So when he saw Blake coming to find him, he had a cold expression on his face and looked as if he wanted to keep everyone at arm's length. At first, Blake could still coax him gently. However, Blake was fundamentally impatient at heart. After coaxing him a few times and seeing that Asher was still so cold towards him, he got angry again. He said to Asher in a harsh tone, "Asher, I advise you not to be ungrateful. I know that your mother didn't leave you her estate. If you offend me, you won't get any of my money either." Blake thought that by saying that, he could control Asher. After all, he knew better than anyone else how high Asher's demands for material life were. Even at a young age, he already had a strong sense of vanity. But unexpectedly, Asher didn't give in as Blake had expected. Instead, he just said faintly, "If you don't want to give me money, then don't." Blake was stunned at this. Asher looked at him sarcastically. "Are you shocked? Yes, I did care about your lousy money before. But when I had allergic reactions time and time again and was on the verge of death in the hospital, I realized that these things really didn't matter. What I really wanted was someone who cared about me and loved me." But, Asher's eyes turned red when he said this. "The person who really cared about me and loved me has already left." As a spirit, I looked at Asher and finally confirmed at this moment that he really regretted it. He also really missed me and realized my kindness. But still there weren't too many ripples in my heart. Because it was already too late, my spirit felt lighter and lighter. At the same time, many images flashed before my eyes like a revolving lantern. Only then did I realize that I was seeing the future of Asher and Blake. In those images I saw that Asher achieved nothing in his life in the end. He never met another person who cared about him as much as I did in his whole life. In the end, he married someone he didn't love and muddled through his life. His children didn't get close to him in the end either. There were no major disasters, but he couldn't be said to be happy at all. And as for Blake, it was even worse. His only son didn't recognize him. He tried various ways to have descendants, but none of them succeeded. Instead, his body was emptied by all kinds of messy medicines and he finally died alone miserably. After seeing all of this, I slowly closed my eyes. This life was finally over. In the next life I will live for myself, not as anyone's mother or anyone's wife. Asher's side story. My name is Asher. I used to dislike my mother very much because the mothers of other classmates were always dressed up exquisitely and beautifully, but my mother was always slovenly. Her withered yellow hair, her face without makeup, and her clothes that were long out of fashion always made me feel ashamed in front of my classmates. So when I found out later that my father was with Aunt Jessica, I wasn't angry. Instead, I even felt proud. Because Aunt Jessica was so beautiful. Every time she appeared, she made me look good in front of my classmates. Moreover, Aunt Jessica was also very nice to me. Mom always wouldn't let me eat KFC, wouldn't let me eat potato chips, and wouldn't let me drink Coke, but Aunt Jessica would buy these delicious things for me. So I couldn't help secretly thinking how nice it would be if Aunt Jessica could be my mother. Later I got my wish. Dad and Mom got divorced and Aunt Jessica really became my mother. My good days came. I was free with no one to control me. I could eat whatever I wanted and play as long as I wanted. But what I didn't expect was that the happiness I thought I had didn't last long before great changes took place. Firstly, I had allergic reactions again and again. Only then did I realize that I could have a healthy body before because my mother was beside me annoyingly supervising me. The real beginning of the nightmare was when Aunt Jessica got pregnant. My father only had eyes for that woman and the child in her belly and didn't care about me anymore. I had attacks again and again and was on the verge of death on the hospital bed time and time again, but no one came to care about me. Later, once I had a very serious allergic reaction. My respiratory tract was all swollen and I couldn't breathe. In the despair of lack of oxygen, I thought of my mother again. If Mom were here, she definitely wouldn't let this happen. I finally realized that I had driven away the person who cared about me the most. I originally thought that although I had driven Mom away, she must still love me. As long as I turned back a little and symbolically softened my attitude, she would come back to me immediately. Just like before, whenever I was angry and hit or scolded her, although she would be angry and punish me, she would forgive me in the end. So I went to find her. But unexpectedly, I saw her hugging another young man backstage. I was so angry. So even my mother didn't want me anymore? I cursed her out. But I never expected that it was the last time I saw her. My mother passed away. Only then did I know that she had been sick all along. But I didn't even notice that she was getting thinner and more haggard. Moreover, the lawyer also told me that Mom didn't leave me any extra money, only the most basic living expenses, and she would even donate all the money after I came of age. Only at this moment did I finally realize that Mom really wouldn't forgive me and that she had really left. I was so angry that I shouted and yelled at the lawyer. I wasn't angry about not having money. I couldn't accept that mom was so heartless towards me. But no matter how much I shouted, mom wouldn't come back. Later, dad sent me to a boarding school and I got sick several times. During these times when I was sick, I even thought that it would be nice if I just died like this. Would I be able to see mom after I died? Would mom also be as gentle to me as before? But I still didn't die. Instead, I survived and lived a dull life all my life. Later, dad came to find me, and then I knew that Jessica's child wasn't his. He wanted to make up with me. But I wouldn't forgive him. Just like mom wouldn't forgive me. That night I dreamed of mom. I saw her in the distance and I shouted at her loudly. I thought she would run over to hug me and care about me immediately as before. But she didn't. She just gave me a faint look and then turned around and left. Later, I woke up with a start and burst into tears. Because I always felt that this dream was real. That person was really mom and she really didn't want me anymore. I really regretted it. But in this world there is no medicine for regret.